Well, here we go again. This is, in a way, a continuation of the description of the quest, um, but it's about the death of Hip. And it's kind of a matter of the dark side of the hippie phenomenon. Much as the peace, joy, and happiness that we tried to bring to the society, um, as much of the love generation and flower power and all that has been touted about so that the information is easily accessible. Um, Maybe the darker side isn't so successful. Maybe the difficulties arose way back with the society in the 50s, which we all thought was pretty phony and hypocritical. The 60s gradually emerged. I was one of the pioneers, one of the people in the trenches, so to speak. And at the time, there was no such thing as a hippie. We were counterculture, and we were doing a lot of drugs and doing our own thing. We were known as fringies in the larger circle of the university community because we were hanging out at the edge of the university. I was one of the ones that dropped in and dropped out and dropped in and dropped out. I'm trying to make this useful for a supposed 30-year-old that is willing to watch this, some old coot bringing up old memories about a long past era, who knows nothing of the current counterculture or what we're going through. But if you're a little bit patient, you'll find that occasionally the elders can relate experience that you can relate to and begin to comprehend in terms of what that might mean for you. Okay, old hippies are all about to die. That means that the hippie era will pass from living memory to records, text, and video and audio and such. Not that it is a cultural treasure of the 20th century, that movement. And what we tried to do, of course, failed. We wanted to make a garden earth. We wanted love as a primary value to permeate the society. That was youthful idealism, of course, and it might have been a bit of a pot dream too, because most of us that joined that movement at whatever level or time were involved in that. We thought we were beatniks. The inspiration was from Kerouac and Cody and Ferlinghetti and Gary Snyder and all of those beatnik innovators, the Rebop, whatever it was they were doing in North Beach and in Venice and so on was not unlike what we later did in Haight-Ashbury and other such places. I was in Madras in New Mexico, and Ginsberg was there with his band, the Quadrasexuals. This was in 1982, probably. And he was in his fine form as ever, Ginsberg was. And he was probably stoned. He acknowledged me and, wanted me to come closer, but I thought I was already out of my comfort zone, so I kind of stood my ground. But there was among his retinue a gentleman who was dressed as a classic beatnik with the beret and the turtleneck and various other attributes of the old beatnik. So it survived. And now all those old beatniks are gone, so there's no longer a direct explanation of detail, shall we say. So back to detail. On the University of California at Berkeley's campus, there is a footbridge. And One day, it must have been in something like 66, I was under the bridge with a new friend, and we shared a joint. And that was the first time that I smoked weed. I had no idea what I was getting into, but it started my drug-a-log that very moment. And the hippie world was fairly new to me. I had migrated from Portland to Seattle, from Reed College to the University of Washington, and promptly got into a circle of bright people that were unconventional and didn't like the system very well. And I fit in perfectly in that circle. In fact, it was the first time that I felt socially acceptable, was in the circle of my hippie friends. So we continued to do what we were doing. We, again, following the beatniks, got very interested in Zen, and we'd sit around and get loaded on pot, as we called it in those days, and quote Zen koans at each other, and Zen stories of what these roshis were doing. And we didn't understand at the time that that eccentric behavior came out of the cosmic inspiration after years of disciplined meditation. And we had the koans, but we had neither the discipline nor the meditation. So we didn't get very far, but it planted the seed. I consider myself very fortunate in that as I went on the downward spiral of my hippie career, I learned a whole lot about the up and down of the world, as well as getting around the block in one piece. And indeed, that's maybe the takeaway lesson for somebody that doesn't care about folk history, which this is an exemplar of. Doesn't care about folk history, but is interested in possible techniques and strategies of survival, because I'm a survivor. And there were quite a few of my peers that didn't survive. There was, of course, the aspect of illegality to what we were doing. So we had tight little cliques. The clique I was in was made up of quite a few fairly bright people, interlocking circles of people. There was Jim, who later became a cokehead and then became a lawyer, or vice versa, I'm not sure. Good man, Jim. Very bright. Was a history major at the time. Turned us all on to Ibn Khaldun, which was a historian that operated before Herodotus, or at least did historiography that Herodotus didn't do, but enough of that. That's intellectual nonsense, and what we were trying to do really did come from the heart, and really did come from a genuine wish to make things better. And what we created was inadvertent. You know, nobody in the days of fringies had any idea what hippies would be. And the people that followed us were a very large mass. Then there was Reg, a poet, made some really good poetry. Talented people. Then in the other circle there was John, who had gone to China at age 16 and spoke Chinese as a second language, who was interested in being a scholar of things Chinese. And there was Ralph, who is a painter and has gone through numerous reinventions of some really fine painting work that never caught on in the market. And he's got a garage full of it in Moscow, Idaho, as we speak. It's good stuff. I have a sensitivity to art. I spent a lot of time in art galleries and whorehouses when I was in Europe as an 18-year-old. And so I saw a lot of art. I've become sensitive to what is good art and what is better art. And my friend Ralph's art is is superb. I mean, it's really quite good, very innovative. However, the three of us, I remember one time, got chopsticks and banged on a ceramic bowl. I was singing karma, 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 karma. And you got to attribute some of this to the effects of the marijuana. Like one time I handed somebody a pair of glasses and see these are rose-colored glasses. Take a look. And he looked at the rose-colored glasses. And then I said, there's no lenses in those. It's actually that rose-colored light in the corner. And he said, you're a mind spinner. That's what. So I got the title Mind Spinner at the time. And luckily, the mind has stopped spinning long since. I even took dervish lessons and can remember more or less how to do the turn. You have to make a pivot and turn around the pivot, whirling. I do it fairly slow when I do it. I got to admit that start with beatniks got me into Buddhism via Zen. I was especially interested in Kerouac's Dharma bums and emulated a lot of the behavior in Dharma bums, actually. Another story for another day. Not to ramble too far from it, I'm trying to get an objective description of one hippie's experience as the whole deal went down. And some of us hated the system, but most of us were just a little bit appalled at how rapidly it fell apart. And it was not only the system, it was the reaction of the society to a bunch of druggies in flamboyant clothes. It was a reaction to what was genuinely massive spiritual change, which is what we were really about. We were about transforming the American psyche so that it's more spiritualized. And, some of these dreams are not dead. It's just that those of us who dreamed it are mostly dead already. But that is the nature of things. And one of the things that we were trying to do was to get back to nature, which was one of the phases of the movement as things began to fall apart. Hard drugs came into Haight-Ashbury. A lot of people started the Back to the Land movement and bought rural farms and learned to farm and had amazing interactions with the locals who had been there for generations. But there was a lot of harmony going on, a lot of mutual acceptance along sociologically very disparate circles. Miracles do happen. They're usually not in the news. As we begin to be discovered, when the Summer of Love happened, I'm not sure what year that was, 65, 66, then everything went public and the reaction began, and pretty soon it was open season on hippies. And then there's the matter, I don't want to go into it too deeply, but the cops did not know the difference between the cops and robbers game and the cops and hippies game because they didn't understand hippies in the slightest. And criminalizing that subgeneration, one of Ginsberg's lines, I have seen the best minds of my generation in the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. And basically criminalizing the intelligentsia that way, the leading edge of the thinkers and creative people, the way apparently happens every generation in some way or another. But then that again is the advantage of listening to an old codger reminisce. Yeah, it's that these things repeat in slightly different form. And if you begin to pick up the form behind the incidentals, you can see, we're going through that again, which is why I started by saying, note the time loop, here we go again. I should mention that there's another practical reason. This is 2019, and we're talking about the era around 1968 or so. In 1965, the planets Pluto and Uranus were together in the sky. That's called a conjunction. They're both outer, slow-moving planets that have to do with the archetypal energies that descend on the Earth from the farther reaches of the solar system. Now, what happens when two planets are in conjunct? The faster one begins to pull ahead. And in this case, Uranus, the planet of revolution, of lightning, of electromagnetic effect, of awakening, of disruption, of revolution, that planet moved ahead of Pluto, which is the planet of the netherworld, the planet of transformation, the planet of plutocrats, which this apparently is, anymore this country at least. Off the podium, Bob. Okay, we're talking about the planets. Uranus gradually got to the quarter cycle, 2017 to 2020, I think. And that quarter cycle indicates that now the first sprouts of the seeds that were planted in 1965 are now sprouting in 2019. So it's like the spiral of time has resonant points. So you get a certain resonance with the 60s currently. There's already a renaissance in music going on. Even as somebody out of the generation, and after all, it's adolescent music. If it doesn't make the elders put their paws over their ears, then it's not good rock and roll, right? But I've been listening to a few songs at a time of the alternative rock, and it's an impressive renaissance of the musical style. I assume the same thing is happening in video art, and I've never been in gaming world except for Ms. Pac-Man, right? So, you get the little tennis flipper that makes the bunk, bunk, bunk that started the whole gaming world. I know nothing of it, basically, except what they put on the TV. But those things have changed us. And I think that the genuine aspirations that we had in the hippie era have changed the society for the better, but not enough for the better. Things were bad in the 50s in terms of conformity and superficiality. They were worse in the 80s, and I'm not sure how much of it is going to be left in 2025. It's certainly a wide spectrum of possibilities, and we have no idea which way it's going to go, how it's going to manifest, but it looks catastrophic from here. I should mention that we can take credit for being the seeds of the feminist movement, the seeds of the yippie movement, and that was one of the places where the tide turned. As hippies, we were very alienated from the system, but we weren't activists. We were doing a cultural thing. It was about music. It was about art. About creativity. Look at the Paisley. Look at the first light shows, which were pretty clever, but primitive compared to the kind of video display that you get with the CGI and such. Again, none of that existed. I'm in the generation, I was born in 43. I was first exposed to television at age 7, and all my elders were radio people. So they would watch the TV, but they didn't quite get how it worked. And, us kids got some of it, but what about the 2-year-olds that were accustomed to the TV? And now think, 2-year-olds are accustomed to the cell phone. Is their experience going to be anything like your experience? Only in the universal human sense. So to make sense of this, we'll have to consider what human universals are about, since we're in dire danger of cultural and ecological collapse. Scary moments in history. The wheels continue to turn, and we don't know the outcomes. It seems that this cosmic orientation that was common in those days among us, also not only the now generation, but the love generation, even the free love generation. We really were trying to get into the now, into the present moment. And now the mindfulness movement is echoing some of our aspirations, which did, after all, start to be affected by Eastern mysticism via the actual Zen Roshis who appeared on the west coast of America. And the beatniks and would-be beatniks were clamoring at the gates asking it to be taught meditation. In Japan, the meditations are only for the monks. The lay people don't meditate. And it's very unusual to have a bunch of lay people asking to learn to meditate, but that gradually formed the first Zen centers in the U.S. And Zen has been with us ever since. Very low profile, very busy doing the necessary inner work to clear up all these psychological and cultural and sociological hang-ups. Off the podium again. Let's try to keep this straight, even though maybe our route wasn't straight. I should mention, part of the problem of being underground as a counterculture is that it intersects with the world of criminality. So not only were we treated like criminals, even though that we weren't, we were illegal because we were using a substance which shouldn't have been illegal in the first place. But that's another podium trip. In any case, by mixing with people of criminal intent, we picked up some shadow side situations. I'll tell one after things got serious, and as I say, it was open season on hippies. I escaped from a police car, which was a sheriff's vehicle, which was taking me down to the state insane asylum, okay? And that was way underground. The cops, as far as I could tell, were fascists. They had that fascist feature of being deadly afraid of craziness and sickness, the way the Nazis were in Germany in the 30s. And not only that, and one of my criminal friends had told me a trick for escaping from a police car. And I was in the back seat, handcuffed to a bar, a wooden bar, along with my friend Jimmy the Indian, who had been arrested for opening and closing car doors. He had his Bible with him, and he kept slapping his, or he kept lovingly stroking, not stroking, but patting his Bible, saying, "This is my proof." And he would say that over and over again. And we were being taken down to the nut house, right? And we stopped for gas. And the fella that came up to the window looked at me and said softly, "We're gonna," and I got it, action. So I used that trick that I had learned from my criminal friend in the hippie underground, right? And said, "I'm gonna be sick." Get me to a bathroom. I'm going to barf all over the place. I remember exactly what I said. But they freaked out and uncuffed me from the wooden bar. We got out of the vehicle. It seems to me like I was strapped to the side with some kind of restraints, which contradicts the other memory. So this is a reconstruction. But anyway, there were two people carrying a long pole. So I'm out of the squad car, but I'm restrained, but my legs are free. And the pole got swung around suddenly, and the guy that had caught my eye before said, "Go left," and I took off like a shot across the asphalt. And I would have made it to the bushes, and I don't know if I would have escaped the rest of the way or not, but a pickup truck with a horse trailer pulled in front of me, blocking my escape, and the deputy tackled me on the asphalt. So that was the end of that. But this is the kind of thing that began to happen to us. I got to especially cite the undercover folks here, because they were all over us once it became public what we were doing. And the narcs in the pot parties were not exactly on our side, and they sometimes brought stuff to dump on us. So gradually, at least in my case, things got worse. I was pretty naive. There was some bad energy in the room. Somebody had to take the fall. It turned out to be me. So that's where the dark side begins in my particular case. However, I survived all that. And looking back, what wisdom I've gained in life, and some of it's way too practical, indicates that we were on the right track. We just didn't have the rest of the pattern of how a new world must be if we were to have any world at all. And how about the future, folks? Are we an extinct species or not? We certainly are heading towards extinction. The seeds of the ecology movement were definitely in the 60s among the hippies. One book came across my path. It was called The Web of Life. It was a paperback. The fellow who wrote another one called Man in the Web of Life, which I never read. But I read The Web of Life, and I got the idea of the total interconnection of the biological species on the planet. So from that moment on, I was a convinced ecologist, even though no such thing existed except the biometrics people in the biology departments who were called ecologists in those days. And now we're facing global climate catastrophe, and the planetary engineers had better step up and figure out how to get rid of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, or whatever they might need to do to ensure human survival. There was a picture of Allen Ginsberg on the underground newspaper in San Francisco. It was called The Oracle. And it was a picture of him, a full folio-sized page picture of him. And in large balloon letters, not balloon letters, but elaborate letters, hippie letters underneath the poster page that was on the newspaper, it said, "Evolve or die." A very striking image. And if that was true in 1967, it's certainly still true. If we don't evolve as a species, we're going to die as a species. It's that simple. And I mean spiritual evolution. I mean cultural evolution. Even technological evolution. We've got too much inappropriate technology. It's messing up everybody's head. For me, it started on a full moon. We were camping on Indian land. Not that we aren't all camping on Indian land. But this was on a Quinault reservation by the seashore in western Washington. And we, in fact, a couple of us went into the Indian town and bought some salmon, and we had a salmon barbecue on the beach. A bunch of hippies. We had lots of marijuana. There were 7 of us. It was a very strange mix. I ended up hitching a ride with a couple. I was leaving the university forever and going down to a Zen temple in Chinatown in San Francisco. And after that party, which went on for several days, was done with, I hitched a ride with them, and we went down south towards San Francisco. It was a really strange scene. She wanted to play triangle. She wanted out of her current relationship, and I was a likely prospect for the next. And I wasn't buying it. I wanted to go to the Zen temple. And furthermore, it was open season on hippies, and we were all clearly hippies. So you stop for gas, you stop at a convenience store or whatever. Then there's that whole vibe about the ordinary people having discovered that there are these really outrageous people called hippies who are doing all kinds of shocking things. None of them very harmful, I might add, but shocking nevertheless. And we reveled in straightening out the squares with shock value. So it's a two-way street, these interactions always are. In any case, I ended up getting off at Crater Lake and walked into town. Town was quite a ways away. Now, I don't remember how I got through, but I did. And I ended up getting arrested, and I ended up on the boxcar rail line on my way south. So I was riding the trains, the freight trains, getting down towards Oakland. I got off by Mount Shasta, and that's a whole other story. But I did make it to the Zen temple after a stint in the insane asylum, and they claimed they chanted me out of that institution. And the irony of it is, maybe they did, who's to say? The irony of it is that later, when they started shutting down all the state asylums, that land in Ukiah that was Mendocino State Hospital went up for sale, and the Zen temple I had been going to bought it and turned it into what's called the City of the 10,000 Buddhas. So in a way you could say I was patient zero at the City of the 10,000 Buddhas, which still exists as far as I know. But we're looking at 1968. And that's when it really began to unravel. You have the Chicago riots, the disgraceful goings-on with the Democratic Convention in Chicago. It turned into a police riot, and nasty stuff. First it became famous. You had the loved all human being in the park, the love generation in mass, with a lot of marijuana and quite a bit of LSD, I would guess. And then you had Woodstock. And you had Altamont, where the Rolling Stones had the Hells Angels as bodyguards, and somebody got killed. So that was the downside of Woodstock. And we had both the up and down side. And as one of the people who got caught, I was on the downside. I never got caught holding marijuana, but I got caught high several times. And they knew I was a high. Where's your lid, kid? You know, that sort of mockery and taunting, as they ended up sending me to the psych ward because there was no crime involved. I was just behaving outrageously in some way or another that that the conventional people didn't like. Now, is there any lesson to be taken from that? For one thing, idealism is not dead, it's just changed form. The spiritual impulse to evolve personally and collectively has not changed and is taking a new form. And I certainly salute the new forms that it's taking, because the need is dire and the time is short. And everybody knows what's going on, but hardly anybody is willing to talk about it. And I just did.